Hello, and welcome, everyone. I am laughing because we were just doing selfies together up here. I am Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks so much for joining us for day one of a marathon couple of sessions we're going to have. It's called A More Perfect Union, our 3-day virtual festival. America didn't just happen. It was created in order to advance the human condition, to give rise to democracy, to sculpt a nation of opportunity, values, and rule of law. That experiment continues to this day, and while achievements abound, the idea that is America remains short of its promise. While staggering technological achievements in health, communication, space, energy, computing, manufacturing, transportation, and more, they're transforming our lives, and there's still too many struggling to put food on the table, though, to get health care coverage, to escape the isolation and bleak options that constrain communities that progress has ignored. America is worth the effort, I believe, always learning from the past, evaluating, reconsidering, debating, and improving, and that's what this is about today. We're going to spend 3 days here to look at these issues and bring a lot of voices together. We're going to be hosting conversations with people with diverging perspectives, including political leaders, policy innovators, and thought provocateurs. We will bring a number of viewpoints onto our virtual stage to discuss the most challenging issues of our day. If you feel uncomfortable with some of our people, that is good. We need to get out of our tracks. We need to get out of our heads a little bit. We need to be exposed to sometimes people who think and see things differently. That's what I hope we do as we're debating and sculpting and thinking about what a more perfect union means and should mean in this country. Each day will be divided into 3 segments. Rise is our morning briefing featuring the editors and reporters at The Hill in discussion with leading political and policy influencers to tackle big questions of consequence for America. Our afternoon segment, Focus, will take a deep dive into a single issue with one-on-one and panel discussions, digging into topics like digital infrastructure, cyber threats, and the economy. Some of it's going to be positive, I hope. It's just not all threats and depressing issues. And finally, Reveal. Our last session of the day will put tough questions in front of our nation's leaders and industry chieftains to determine how to move forward together. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Microsoft and Southern Company, for their support of this big festival and these great conversations. And I hope you get online and look at them all because they are fantastic. The team here has done an extraordinary job. I just want to thank my team because it's going to be cool. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events, The Hill Events. You don't have to really do that because I know that's a lot of characters. But do use the hashtag TheHillAMPU. AMPU stands for A More Perfect Union. We are broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, just refresh the page. Don't throw your computer out the window. Hopefully that will be the quick fix. Our first segment of the day will put the spotlight on our nation's cities. We're going to explore the evolving technology-driven cities of today and tomorrow and ask what it will take to make sure progress is sustainable, equitable, and really to understand the value and importance of cities in the architecture of our future. I'm happy to be joined by my great colleague, Julia Manchester. We were just taking selfies together up here. Julia is one of our leading correspondents at The Hill. She's going to help lead the conversations this morning. Julia, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I'm so excited to be here.
We always have fun with you. So, look, our first guest is Richard Florida. He's a great friend of mine. He's an author, professor, and co-founder of City Lab. It's a publication devoted to cities and urbanism. His most recent book is vital for you to read. It just really lays out the political landscape of this country. And when you realize he wrote in 2017, he was very prescient. It's called The New Urban Crisis, which explores the challenges facing cities today. Richard, so great to be with you, my friend. Listen, today, and what's exciting about this is to talk about a more perfect union. What does this look like? When you wrote your book in 2017, you talked about a tale of two nations that were sort of living next to each other. I'd love to kind of hear how you're looking at the nation today in this, I won't even call it the post-COVID, the COVID duration that we're still in, but how has it affected your map, so to speak, of how you think about the country and where we're going?
Well, Steve, thanks for having me. I'm a great fan of yours and a great friend of yours and a great fan of what you're doing at The Hill. So thanks for including me in this. Look, let's take it from your subject matter, a more perfect union. Where is our union broken? Right there in Washington, D.C., with this heinous, I would say heinous and horrifying polarized politics, which is dysfunctional. And if you look at polling data, I think it's about 20% of Americans have any level of faith and confidence in our federal government. Now, where I think the union is pretty perfect, where I think we can look at Tocqueville's America, is in communities large and small all across this country where I get to go and visit. Whether it's Milwaukee or Indianapolis, Bentonville or Tulsa, Pittsburgh or Boston, I could go on. Mayors, local leaders, public and private sectors and nonprofit sectors pulling together to rebuild and revitalize. And by the way, Steve, since we've last talked, I launched a podcast called The Mayors. I've now had the opportunity to speak to about 12.5 mayors, Republican and Democrat. And they're all the same. They all want the exact same things. They're all pragmatic and non-ideological. So if you ask me, from the point of view of Washington, D.C., we look pretty unperfect. But when we get on that ground level in our communities, we look like a real united cities or united communities of America. So I think that's where the rubber hits the road, and I think that's where we build our union.
Well, so one of my favorite mayors, I mean, I have a lot of favorite mayors out there in case mayors are watching this, but a lot of favorite mayors, like, love you all. But I've spent a lot of time talking to Francis Suarez of Miami, the mayor of Miami, what he's doing. So I don't know if he's been in your podcast list. And of course, in January,
He has been.
January, February, we always have the Conference of Mayors here in Washington. And I found the same thing. I'd just be interested in our audience understanding, what is a mayor like Francis Suarez, what does he's sort of, a centrist, pragmatic, but, if you peel that back, he's a Republican, but he's fascinating. If you kind of look at other mayors that are Democrats in the same, what are they trying to do? What do they want? What are they sculpting?
Well, I think Francis was the first mayor on the pod, partly because I spend the winter in Miami Beach, so I know the area very well. We've had all three mayors from Greater Miami: Dan Gelber from the city of Miami Beach, and Daniela Levine Cava, who's the mayor of Miami-Dade County, who has the deep pocketbooks. But look, Mayor Suarez has decided that he really wants to grapple with making Miami a tech hub and a greater global city. He's probably the best marketer mayor I have ever seen, and the best. I mean, the guy is a social media maverick. But yeah, and it's very funny. When we talked, he said, it was very interesting as a Republican. He said, and this was back right about when Joe Biden took office, about when you guys talked. He said, I've talked to Joe Biden's people a lot more than I've talked to Donald Trump's people, and I'm glad they want to help us. Yeah, I think whether it's a Francis Suarez, who's a Republican, or a Danielle Levine Cava, I could go down the list. They all want the same thing. They want to build thriving communities. And that's why I think, Steve, when you said, what's my map? I think the big issue confronting our country, and you and I have talked about this, but I want to lay it out there right at the beginning of this incredible conference you've organized, is that there's simply too much power in Washington, D.C. We talk about the tech titans and the oligarchs. Sure, that's important. But the big issue in America is the federal government and the imperial presidency have way too much power. And I think the big agenda item that needs to be done in our country is we've got to move power down. We have a federalist instrument that our founders gave us, which enables us to dial up power to the executive branch when we needed to, maybe during the Industrial Revolution and the New Deal. Now we got to dial it back down. And I think if we want to make a perfect union or a more perfect union, we've got to take power out of Washington and give it back to community. And I don't just say cities, suburbs and rural areas, red and blue. We have to empower people to live the kind of lives they want and not get in their faces. So I think this idea of devolving power to the local is the way to really create a more perfect union.
Richard, I don't know if you've looked at it in the City Lab world, but in the infrastructure bill, which is pending and been written, and I've heard the same thing from many leaders around this country at the non-federal level, but I said, what do you most need? And they say in this infrastructure bill, and they say, we need them to understand that we know how to program this money better than they do in D.C. So I'm just interested in whether any of your folks have looked at the infrastructure bill. Does it give that empowerment at the local level, the state level, the city level for that to happen?
It needs to. And I think the federal technology hubs part of the bill gets us there. I'm actually writing something on this right now. Steve and folks, I was very big in the industrial competitiveness movement, working with the Council on Competitiveness, with the big corporate interests in America and our government back in the 80s and 90s to put our country on the right foot and rebuild our industries. And we did it. I now think we have to shift to place-based competitiveness. If you want my bottom line on this, if the industrial corporation was the key to creating a strong economy back in the days of my dad and the great factories. Our cities and our communities, our metropolitan areas are the cornerstone of competitiveness. That's where our innovation really comes from, this collaboration where talented people and ideas come to mate and thrive. I think we've got to put an emphasis on place-based competitiveness, and I think that's what the bill gets us started doing. But the more power that can be devolved to the metropolitan level, these conglomerations of cities and suburbs and rural areas, the more they can define what's needed, the better off we'll be.
Richard, you tweeted out recently, you write, the more I watch the reactionary policies raining down in Texas and Florida, the more I'm confident coastal superstar cities and tech hubs are going to be just fine. Tell me what's on your mind.
Well, first of all, I'm a part-time resident of Florida, and I love the state. My great collaborator and colleague, Stephen Pedigo, runs the LBJ Urban Lab in Austin, in Texas. He wrote a great piece for the Times on why Texas is the future. I think that Texas and Florida could have a great future if they stop with this reactionary nonsense. And here's why. I think that these techies tend to be, and the tech talent, not the tech titans, the tech talent tends to be pretty fiscally conservative, pretty economically conservative. They like to keep their money. They don't like high taxes, but they're also very socially progressive. When I wrote my book, Rise of the Creative Class, back in 2002, techies at that time were telling me they look for places that have great women's rights, great gay rights, not because those issues are central to their hearts, but because they signal a place that is more meritocratic and meritorious, where individual effort is rewarded. And I think that what some of the red states have been doing is creating this very anti-urban, kind of socially progressive posture, which is going to drive tech talent away. If they just dump that, they'd be fine. But look, in terms of where our tech hubs are, people have been talking about the rise of new tech hubs now for the past year during the pandemic. You look at the data, the San Francisco Bay Area is still number one by a large margin. And guess what's number two? New York City. Right. Austin has been building for a while now. You know, Austin is no overnight sensation. It's been growing a tech hub for 20, 30 years. Miami's getting there, but really the dominant tech hubs remain what they were before the pandemic.
I was blown away I was in Austin this last weekend. I was just blown away. All right, just finally, Richard, and we'll play a little game here. I'm interested in the Richard, Florida ranking of the best cities in the world today. And, just give us your top one or two. And then 10 years from now, project who you think will be the top one or two.
Well, I'm coming to you today from Toronto, and I think Americans should take a long look at Toronto because it's a city that's safe. And I think one of the things that's happening to American cities now is that crime and urban disorder are surging again. And I think that's partly a result of the pandemic and being pent up. You look at European cities like Copenhagen or Paris or even London, they don't experience some of these problems. What I'm really hot on today, in addition, I'm from New York, I love the city, is these smaller communities. You mentioned Austin, we talked about Miami. Right. The Tulsas, the Bentonvilles, the Omahas, the Kansas Cities. One of the things that I'm seeing in my travels is there used to be such a gap in terms of quality of life and amenity between the big superstar cities like New York and San Francisco and the small towns. Now I think that you can get those amenities anywhere. And with this powerful effort of people coming together and building these public-private partnerships, which really have rebuilding America, I think we're seeing a renaissance. So I think we're seeing communities across America, urban, suburban, and rural, all coming to the fore and all building a better union.
Well, listen, we'll have to leave it there. Richard Florida, founder of the Creative Class Group, author of Rise of the Creative Class and the New Urban Crisis, also co-founder of City Lab. It's a real pleasure anytime I get to spend time with you, and you're exactly the right person to start this conference with. So thank you so much, Richard Florida.
Thank you, Steve. Hope to see you in person soon. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for that discussion, Steve. That was very fascinating. But our next guest is Deborah Lam, the founding executive director of the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, a public-private partnership that invests in innovative pilot projects across the state of Georgia. Deborah, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Great, great. So, Deborah, to start off with, in your title, you're the executive director of the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. And that particular term, inclusive innovation, caught me. Talk to me about what that is and how cities can use inclusive innovation to improve their own standing when it comes to developing a smart city.
Yeah, and I really like how this is a nice segue and continuation from what Richard said earlier in terms of the importance of public-private partnerships and the sizes of communities throughout. It doesn't necessarily need to be a large size. For us in Georgia, we really were very intentional about how we wanted to innovate. We didn't want to model off of what we saw existing, which was a huge range of inequalities and other issues. And so we really thought of what is the best way to bring increased access and opportunities for all Georgians to innovate, and that innovation isn't an end state, but a way to drive economic and community development. So, we wanted to make sure that the process was inclusive and strong and sound and really pull together a much bigger tent. And we believe that by doing this, we would result in a stronger outcome in terms of long-term growth and community development.
Right. And when we talk about this topic of community development in urban cities, we hear this term smart cities. Describe for the layman watching right now what a smart city is.
Yeah, and what's great about this is that I think, it's a term that doesn't necessarily need to be technology only. And for us, it's a continuous improvement process that starts with the local problem or priority, whatever that is, and think about what are the appropriate tools, be it technologies, hardware, software, data, and that could improve the community's quality of life, improve the human condition, or solve whatever problem they have. And this could include anything from, transportation issues about mobility, accessibility. It could include energy efficiencies, water, anything, healthcare. You start with thinking about what the problem is, who's there, the greater community. It can't be solved by a singular city. And think more about the private sector, think more about startups, think more about small businesses coming together to really work on the problem that ultimately benefits the people.
And on this topic of smart cities, based off of your observations, what's working for them and what isn't? What are the pros and cons there?
Yeah, well, what's been great for us at the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation is that we've, like I said, been able to have a very big tent. So in the traditional innovation space, as you probably are familiar with, it's usually led, only by startups. You see a lot of that. And in a lot of the smart city space that you're familiar with, and what was said earlier is that, there's a lot of large cities, that the focus is. And what we're saying is that, innovation can happen at many different entities, small business, startups, nonprofit groups, local governments, schools, and it can happen at any scale. You don't need to have a certain GDP level or development level. It doesn't matter that you don't necessarily have certain industries. You can really think about what's suitable for that locality and bring people together with appropriate technologies and tools. And that's what we've been able to do at the partnership, was galvanize a coalition of civic and corporate leadership to come together and provide pool investments to spur economic opportunity, next generation workforce development, and really community-driven research to allow everyone to think about ways to innovate that would spur growth.
And, we're coming out of, or hopefully coming out of, this nearly 2-year global pandemic. I know it's really wreaked havoc on cities as well as rural communities across the country, across the world. But when it comes to smart cities, before the pandemic, I remember hearing a lot of experts and reporters talking about the emergence of smart cities, how it, they relate to emerging 5G technology and such. But that conversation, at least publicly or in the main public realm, seemed to get a little quieter during the pandemic. How did the pandemic impact the development of smart cities, and what has it taught developers of smart cities?
I can give you a really good example of what we did in Georgia, was to think about connectivity as a research service, as a broader broadband as a research service. And what that means is that we know that at this point, especially given our experience with the pandemic, that we all see connectivity as a public infrastructure. It's as important as running water and electricity. I think it's very hard to find anyone who disagrees with the importance of that in terms of spurring healthcare, education, economic development. So that's a given. We also know that, whatever happens, there is going to be larger investments made in terms of infrastructure that is related to connectivity. What we're seeing, though, however, is that for a lot of these communities, they're not quite able or ready to capture this opportunity, in terms of expertise, in terms of capacity, in terms of, at the end of the day, a lot of these communities are really trying to support essential services to people. And so, they're not necessarily ready for this large investment towards infrastructure. So what we did actually with the partnership was focus on trying to understand each community and meeting them where they are. So we have a team actually that's working with a few communities in northern Georgia that's focused on understanding the terrain, the local technologies that are necessary to support connectivity. And then once that infrastructure is made, we can then build off of the additional applications. So this includes open source software, additional applications for education, healthcare, et cetera. So understanding that connectivity isn't just the physical infrastructure, is really thinking about the strategic development, the stakeholder engagement, the necessary planning that's needed up front, but then also maintaining the infrastructure in terms of the ongoing application, the data literacy, the training, the cybersecurity awareness that needs to be done on the back end to ensure that it's a 360 holistic approach when it comes to connectivity. And I don't think that's often done because we're just so focused on just putting the pipes down, if you will.
Well, Deborah, this has been a fascinating conversation. I hope we get to continue it in the future. We'll definitely be keeping our eyes on the development of smart cities. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. And now it's time for our mayor's panel. John Giles is the mayor of Mesa, Arizona. He is serving his second full term as mayor, and his priorities include education, digital access, and supporting a growing and creative economy. And Aquanetta Warren is the mayor of Fontana, California. Serving her third term as mayor, she is focused on economic growth and infrastructure improvement throughout her city. Mayor Giles and Mayor Warren, it's great to see the both of you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. Wonderful. Well, just to start off with, I'd like to pose a question to both of you. I know you're both focused on infrastructure and economic development over the past couple of weeks, past couple of months, really, here in Washington. We've been hearing quite a bit about this Build Back Better plan from the Biden administration and this focus on infrastructure. To start off with a news of the day question, I would love to hear about, your opinion, your thoughts on this plan, the state of U.S. infrastructure, and how this is all impacting your individual cities. Mayor Giles, would love to start with you.
Well, thank you. That is a very timely question. And local government, we love infrastructure. So this is the Build Back Better plan, whether you're a Republican or Democrat. And Aquanetta and I happen to both be Republicans, but I think you'll see a lot of enthusiasm for getting more federal involvement in building up our infrastructure. COVID in my community has made some things that were obvious even more obvious. We knew we had a digital divide, but really I had an aha moment, a year and a half ago when I was sitting at a food distribution event at a school, and the families that were coming through were saying, yes, thank you, we need and we want the food, but even more importantly, can we pick up some paper workbooks, for our kids, because the curriculum has shifted to online, and that excludes us. So yes, infrastructure. We've been using this as, again, maybe as an excuse to address some of the infrastructure challenges that we have in our community, including addressing the digital divide, and including what we can do to implement our climate action plan with smart meters and electrifying our fleets. And just engaging in technology, not just for the sake of using technology, but to make life better for the citizens in our community.
And Mayor Warren, what's the situation in Fontana, California? I know that obviously your city is impacted, like many other cities, by the infrastructure talks in Washington.
We're watching it closely, and we're supportive of this happening. We need it. This entire country is being impacted. It is time for America to realize that we cannot continue to kick that can down the road. Our bridges are deteriorating, our streets need help. But more importantly, some of the things that Mayor Giles just talked about, it impacted us too. It was heartbreaking. We have one library here that is huge, and you will see crowds of young people, crowds standing around outside, and people that are walking or talking with me go, what are they doing? They're not inside the building. I said, they're trying to do their homework. They don't have it at home. So we've partnered with the school district in Crown Castle, where we are actually going to impact 36,000 students in our districts that will now have that. But we've got more to do. But I'll tell you, we cannot keep our environment stable if we don't get this infrastructure going. You know, when you got bridges failing to the point where they're falling on top of families, and water infrastructure is deteriorating to the point where you got to start isolating wells, the product and the quality of life is being impacted because we are not paying attention to fixing things. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and we've been talking throughout this event today about the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on smart cities and the development of those smart cities. And I know that both of you have focused on this particular area in your respective cities. Mayor Giles, a few years ago, Mesa adopted a smart city master plan to identify strategies for building a smarter Mesa. What does a smart city look like to you?
Well, I think absolutely, it's a city that it has figured out how to use data. We don't want to use technology just for the sake of using technology. For example, one of the things we're doing right now is building a real-time crime center. And people might walk in and say, "Oh, it looks like you're just trying to, to look like a modern, the Jetsons style, a police department." And nothing could be further from the truth. But because by utilizing technology, we are improving our ability to provide services. We are better able to triage the 911 calls we're getting and to send the right response to those situations. By adopting a smart metering program with our utilities, we are able, again, to help the economy, but also to help our customers to respond, in a real-time basis to the situations that they're facing with their utility providers. So smart city, I think smart you could interchange the word better. We're not trying to use technology just for the sake of technology. We're trying to use it to better the lives of our citizens.
And on that note, Mayor Warren, what does a smart city, in your opinion, look like to you, and how has Fontana sort of evolved to become a smarter city?
We are embracing smart methods. We have to optimize our city functions with budgets way down. We've got to make sure that everything we're doing for citizens is easy for them to access. We've gone to apps. We're looking at our permitting system. We're working on a 311 system. We're doing all these technological functions so that people can get better access to the services. And it's working. And it's also allowing us to get more people involved. And we don't have in our particular city a major network that pays attention to the news that was going on. And during COVID, it became apparent that the only thing they had was our website and our local channel, if they had access to cable. So I went into Mayor Mondays, where I was giving the citizens the latest on what was going on with COVID-19, where to get your vaccination shots, where to get assistance, where to find out what you needed to do. And that all comes from technology. So we have been embracing technology for a number of years, and it really paid off during COVID, and we're still embracing it.
Right, and Mayor Warren, you talked about the involvement of people, the people of your city in this development. Mayor Giles, I know that the opening of the Smart Mesa Today's Initiative website says a smart city is about people, not just tech. And I mean, as a, you know, I'm not an expert in this area, to be quite honest. When I hear the term smart city, I think of tech. What does that saying, a smart city is not just about people, but, or is about people, not just about tech, mean to you?
Well, it goes back to this idea that smart means better. Smart means, I mean, as Aquanetta was saying, we're all financially challenged, right? So we have to, the way that we can, if there's the tricks that we can use to provide better service and at the same time, you know, save some money, we've got to take full advantage of that. That's why I keep going back maybe to this example of electrifying our fleet. But for example, one of the things that we just did last week is Mesa will be the first city in North America to have an operating electric fire truck. Now, some people wanted to criticize us for that, saying, well, why are you, experimenting on technology and then you could have bought a cheaper fire truck? Absolutely, all that's true, but it's because we know that in the future, having an electric fleet and including electric fire trucks is a better way to provide services. It's going to be ultimately less expensive and more efficient. So to me, that's, again, an example of a smart city is a city that's trying to become better.
Mayor Warren, a couple of years ago, you were one of 12 mayors to attend the Mayor's Leadership Institute on Smart Cities. Can you tell us about some of the actions that came out of that meeting and some of the conclusions that were reached?
When I got the opportunity to go to that, I asked all of our department heads to give me a copy of every paper they used to move the agenda. And somebody gave me a big box. So when I came back from that, I said, how can we put these in a way that we don't have all this paper? And our department heads went to work. And now we've improved our permitting system. We are working closer with each other when it comes to processing. But one of the bigger issues is looking at our utilities, because we don't own any of our utilities. We outsource all of that activity. But the communication between those different companies has improved through technology. And what I'm most proud about is our 311 system that actually will alert our public works area when we have wastewater malfunctions or something happens to any of the systems in place. So that conference set the tone for me that we would in fact look at every process and how we could automate it. And it also cut down the amount of time staff was spending, which gives them more time to answer the phones, do in-person needs, and make sure that we're continuing the flow of the city, but in a smart way. As my colleague just said, a better way.
Well, thank you so much to you both for all of this insight today. I know that I certainly feel like I got an education in smart cities. I hope our viewers did too. Thank you so much to Mayor John Giles and Mayor Aquanetta Warren of Fontana, California. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're good to talk with you.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our first segment. A big thank you to our sponsors, Microsoft and Southern Company, and to all of you watching. We'll be back at 2 p.m. for our focus segment, which today will be on digital infrastructure and feature Representatives Peter Welch and Kathy McMorris Rogers. Meet us right back here at 2 p.m. Eastern.